Welcome back to This Week in Immigration. I'm your host, Hanadi Jordan, Communications Associate at the Bipartisan Policy Center. In this week's episode, we're talking about President Biden's recent visit to the U.S. southern border, the challenge of hemispheric migration, and the work that local communities are doing to manage the increasing influx of migrants. We're joined by This Week regular Teresa Cardinal Brown, and our guests this week are David Stout, a county commissioner for El Paso County, Texas, and Andrew Seeley, president of the Migration Policy Institute. We've got lots to talk about on this episode, so stick around. Welcome back. We're kicking off this episode by welcoming David Stout, El Paso, Texas County Commissioner. Welcome, Commissioner Stout.
Thank you very much for inviting me, or as we say here in the borderland, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you for joining us today on the podcast. We really appreciate it. I want to kick us off firstly by talking about Biden's recent visit to El Paso on his way to the North American Leaders Summit. We know he stopped at the El Paso County Migrant Services Center, along with two other locations in El Paso. Many felt that this visit was long overdue. But Commissioner, what were your thoughts on the president's visit?
I think we shared some of the same sentiments. It's great to have the president here, understanding what's going on at the border, and it would have been great for him to come sooner. But I think it was we were glad that he came. And was able to see some of the things that are going on here on the ground. That said, this president's administration has been very accessible to us at the county, and I'm very thankful for the open communication, not just with them, but also with the border authority or border enforcement agencies. And past administrations, it's been much more difficult, the communication and collaboration. And so, we're the county of El Paso is constantly in contact with the White House when it comes to what's going on down here. And I'm very thankful that the Biden administration has listened to some of our requests, especially when it comes to providing funding and resources to help us reimburse our coffers for the expenditures that we've made. It's been millions of dollars that we have spent and will continue to spend over the next year, or probably further into the future. So I think that the County of El Paso has been fully reimbursed for all of the expenditures that we've made, and that's really important for local taxpayers.
Well, Biden's visit came shortly after announcing a new border initiative under which the U.S. will accept up to 30,000 migrants every month from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela via a parole program. These migrants have to have sponsors in the U.S. They can't be entering along the border. And if approved, will fly to the U.S. and will be allowed to stay and work for 2 years. How does this plan affect communities like yours? And do you think this policy helps ease some of the burdens that border communities like El Paso are facing?
I have mixed feelings on what's being done recently by the administration. I feel like Title 42 really, is a rule that lies within public health, and the CDC should not be used to manage the border, to manage immigration. I really feel like the folks that started using that rule, I'm going to be honest, I think it's racist and xenophobic. But I do feel like expanding Title 42 is not the solution. I do, somewhat applaud the Biden administration when it comes to the expanded temporary parole for the other countries, but it's really hard for me to understand how that is going to affect the most vulnerable people, who are the ones that are fleeing those countries. I mean, who has the money to jump on a plane? A lot of these folks are already here in the United States, here in El Paso. You all have seen the images on national news of Sagrado Corazon Church in the heart of my district, down by the border, where a lot of migrants were staying outside in cold, terrible conditions, weather conditions, and and the folks that are now being sent back in an expedited fashion to Mexico. I don't see how they're going to hop on a flight to, once they sign up with, on the CBP1 app, where they're going to get the money. They don't have jobs. They don't have a place to stay. I feel like, we asked the Biden administration to help us to provide relief. To me, that was not the relief that I was expecting. I feel like what we've done is basically just pick the crisis up from this side of the border and set it back down on the other side of the border, or in the other sending countries. And in my opinion, expecting these people who have come so far, who have probably spent every single penny that they have paying smugglers to get them across, who have been subjected to organized criminals and being taken advantage. We're just putting them back into the hands of those organized criminals and leaving them open to being taken advantage even further. And so it's cruel, it's inhumane, and in my opinion, it's I think the Biden administration is trying to do something, but I just don't think we're going down the right road here.
Well, Commissioner, are there specific policies that you'd like to see enacted to respond to the growing border crisis? And are there any specific policies that you'd also like to see implemented to help ease some of the burdens that communities like El Paso are facing?
Right. So, unfortunately, over the last, I don't know how many decades, the only really thing that has been done to, when it comes to immigration is bulking up the border, more quote unquote security on the border, more wall, more border patrol, more militarization of the border. I was on Fox News a couple of weeks ago, right after the Biden visit, and they were showing numbers on the screen while I was talking. They love to talk about the 2.5 million encounters that occurred in 2022 with migrants. And it seems to me that if you are talking about an unprecedented number of migrants being encountered, the policies that we have implemented over the last number of decades, which is basically border enforcement only, it's not really working. If in 2022 you had the largest number of migrant encounters. So, obviously comprehensive immigration reform is something that has really been unattainable. And so, I feel like there's some low-hanging fruit that has bipartisan support. I'm the chair of the Texas Border Coalition, and we put out a white paper last year. During the lame duck Congress, but hoping that something would happen. But it's really, I think, difficult. But that low hanging fruit is there are agriculture. There was an agricultural worker bill that was floated that I think had bipartisan support. I'm also the chair of the Immigration Reform Task Force at National Association of the National Association of Counties, and that organization is made up by Republicans, Democrats, and that task force, has folks that live in rural areas, urban areas, and I think one thing that they all agree upon is that we need immigrant labor in this country, and there's a mismatch between the reality of the country that we live in and the reality of the people who are coming here, and what are the fact that our laws are just so restrictive. We have farmers and ranchers who, whose crops are drying up on the vine or on the fields because they can't get people to come and work on their fields. We have people in the construction industry who can't get houses and buildings constructed because they don't have access to labor. The service industry as well, and so it's obvious, and it's been obvious for so long that there's a need for these folks, for migrants and migrant labor. but we're not adjusting our laws to match that reality. So we could do that. I mean, I think regularizing the status of dreamers is something else that is low-hanging fruit that has bipartisan support. There's a bill that has to do with healthcare workers that is low-hanging fruit. That I mean, we need more access to healthcare workers, and so you know we just can't keep getting caught in this trap of security first, and exclusive focus on immigration enforcement is not going to result in an orderly or fair immigration process. I think the most important factors for improving our system or border security are to adopt those reforms that would provide legal avenues for workers to enter the United States when needed, and allowing border officials to focus more resources on the criminal and terrorist threats that people talk about, right? So hopefully that answers your question there.
Yeah, so enforcement alone does not solve the problem. We need other provisions enacted. And some of the policies that you just mentioned are these policies that border communities have been advocating for.
Yeah, these are things that we've been advocating for a long time, and we've typically, I think, advocated for trying to do things in a comprehensive manner. A big omnibus type bill that will deal with all of these, but I think we've kind of come to the realization that that's unattainable, and so I think we can start chipping away at it, with these programs, the Farm Workforce Modernization Act and the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, as well as the issue with the Dreamers. And I also wanted to real quick, one thing that I just thought about, going back to your first question, with the Title 42 expansion and the parole. I think we're also going to start seeing more unauthorized entries. I'm getting more reports from people in neighborhoods that I represent, that are right on the border of folks not turning themselves into Border Patrol asking for asylum because they now understand that they will be removed in an expedited fashion, and so they're trying to they're not coming over through the ports of entry or through the airports. They're I think we're gonna see more people trying to scale the wall. We're gonna see more people trying to swim across the river. We're gonna see more people trying to run across a very busy highway that we have on our border here in El Paso. All of those things all of those ways are very, very dangerous, and we continuously hear news reports about people drowning in the river, being hit by vehicles, and falling off the wall, being maimed. Our county hospital, has spent millions and millions of dollars in treating these people who have fallen off the wall, and sometimes they die as well. And we really need to look for more humane avenues to deal with this issue. And this border enforcement is not deterring people, it's just pushing them to put their lives even further in danger.
We know that the city and the county have done a lot to address the influx of migrants. Can you discuss some of the work that the city and the county have been doing?
Yeah, the county has played a very important and strong role in this issue, in this area. Before 2018, back in 2018, we had a pretty significant increase in migrants coming into our community. That was during the Trump administration, and I'll tell you, it was night and day. Back then, we had no communication from the border enforcement authorities, and they were just literally taking people and dumping them into our streets without any notice. And I remember, I think it was Christmas Eve in 2018, hundreds of people were dropped off at the bus station, and everybody in the community had to come together and work to try to get these people taken care of and get them shelter and food and such. But before that, El Paso County was on the road to creating an Office of New Americans, Office for New Americans, and Immigrant Services Office. And I'm really glad that we did create that office. It was at my behest because I knew that uh, we need to provide services to immigrants in our community. And I'm really glad that we got that office stood up because it has played such an important role in the coordination, whether it be with the NGOs, with the city, with the federal authorities, in making sure that we are handling things the way we need to be handling them. And so the county has set up a processing center where we're processing folks that have been admitted into the country for their asylum cases, and basically helping them uh, identify where they need to go, how they're going to get there, and making sure that they do get there. That's what we're doing at that processing center. And back in November, December, we were processing up to 600 people on a daily basis. Now, I think there has been somewhat of a chilling effect with especially those who are applying for asylum and who can go through our processing center. And so sometimes we have one person, sometimes we have 10 people. In the last number of weeks, it's been very low. We've also set up a shelter. We're working with a local NGO, the Recovery Alliance, which usually does work with the homeless or unhoused population. And they have a space for 150 beds that we're contracting them to utilize. And we also are providing transportation locally, whether it's from the border to the processing center, or from the processing center to shelters, or from shelters or processing centers to transportation hubs, the airport or the bus station. And we've also chartered buses, but I want to make sure that this is very clear: coordinated chartered buses. We're not doing what the governor of Texas or the governor of Florida have done in the past, where you tell people lies, throw them on a bus, and just drop them off at Martha's Vineyard or some other place to play political games. We are coordinating trips for these folks to the cities that they need to go to. A lot of times it's in California. We've sent people to Houston, some to Florida, even New York, Chicago, Denver. We've depended on places like Phoenix, Albuquerque, and Denver to also serve as transportation hubs for people to be able, because we have limited transportation access. We can only get so many buses out of El Paso or airplanes out of El Paso on a daily basis. And so we've worked really, really hard to try to help those folks get to their final destination in a safe and orderly fashion.
So you've mentioned earlier the involvement of NGOs, and you've spoken in the past about the important role that NGOs play in supporting migration efforts. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that the NGOs have done and why they have been such an essential support?
Yeah, so we have such a compassionate community in El Paso. Our local NGOs have really carried the water when it comes to this issue. Mainly the Annunciation House. Ruben Garcia is the leader at the Annunciation House. He has a network of hospitality sites, what we call them, where he can distribute or take different groups, whether it's single males or single females or family units. He has the logistics down. The model here in El Paso, I think, could serve as a model worldwide for how to deal with the refugee situation. And they have really stepped up. And the majority of the work that's done in these organizations is volunteer work. And I just love this community because there are so many people have come out and spent time at these centers, whether it's feeding people, taking clothing, taking necessities that folks need, sheltering them. Words are not enough to say how thankful I am for the network of NGOs that we have in this community. And they've been doing it for a long time. They're experts and veterans at this, and so I'm really happy that we have them. But I do feel that the federal government should step up and support these NGOs more. And a lot of the NGOs, they are supporting folks that have been processed, people that have been admitted through the asylum process, but there are others that are also tending to the folks that may not have authorized entries. And those folks are the ones that are here in limbo, because it's difficult for them to leave this area. Most of them do not want to stay here in El Paso. They have a final destination. They have family or friends that they can be with in other communities, but there are Border Patrol checkpoints on every major thoroughfare out of El Paso, out of the border region. And if they get stopped at those checkpoints, they will be removed in an expedited fashion now. And so, unfortunately, I think that, again, a lot of these people are looking to possibly be smuggled out of this area. And again, it puts them in a very precarious situation. It opens them up to being taken advantage of. And some of the NGOs, some of the local churches that are taking care of these folks, man, they're just doing God's work, in my opinion. And they've not complained about it. They've been working with us, and we could not take care of these folks without them.
Well, President Biden was not the only elected official to visit El Paso in recent weeks. We know that a bipartisan group of senators visited, which included Texas Republican John Cornyn. Commissioner, how do you think that visit went, and are you anticipating another visit from them soon?
Yeah, so I know a lot of folks nationally were talking about the Biden visit only being a photo op, and he's just coming here to take pictures or whatever. But I feel like John Cornyn's visit was that. I was not in the meeting that they had with local officials, but I did speak to people that were in the meeting, and they told me it was an absolute waste of their time. The Cornyn and the other folks that came, they weren't willing to listen to what local officials were having to say, and they were very disappointed with how things were run, and they feel like they were not listened to or not heard, and that's unfortunate. So I have heard that there is probably going to be a group of Congress people coming in the beginning of February. I spoke to a friend of mine who just got elected to Congress in the Austin area, Congressman Greg Casar, and he was telling me that he might be coming out here, and I think there are other folks that will probably be coming. And I think every congressperson should come and see with their own eyes and experience what's happening here. And I when I was talking to Congressman Casar, I said, hey, things are pretty calm here in El Paso now, but what you should really do is look at what's going on across the border as well. Talk to the officials across the border. Go walk the streets of Juarez. Go to some of the shelters over there and talk to them, because they are now the ones that are dealing with the humanitarian crisis more so than we are. As I said before, it's just been pushed, and to a country that is not as safe, that doesn't have the same level of resources that we do, and that's unconscionable in my opinion.
Well, finally, I'd love to hear you discuss some of the work that you've been doing on the Immigration Reform Task Force of the National Association of Counties, and why that work is important for you.
Yeah, NACO is a great organization to be involved with. I think they're a very trusted organization. They work really well with the White House, with Congress. They advocate on behalf of counties and the needs that we have. They not just in the immigration realm, but and many other realms. But the Immigration Reform Task Force, I think, is really important because we we are the people who, when we always say county government is the one that's closest to the people. And I think that's really the case. We all understand what our communities need, and you know, immigration is not just at the border. Every community in this country probably has immigrants and refugees and people that are seeking asylum are settling in those communities. And so being able to have conversations with folks that have different perspectives and that have different experiences and that want to learn, that want to also help these communities. I think is really it's great to be able to hear from all of these people from different parts of the country, and it's really eye-opening. I was able to bring a cohort of the Immigration Reform Task Force to El Paso in 2019. Right in September of 2019, right before the pandemic, and we took them across to Juarez. We took them to some of the shelters in Juarez, and some of the more staunch Republicans had tears in their eyes, and they, it humanizes this issue when you bring people to this area and show them and make them remember that these are people that we're talking about. I remember we went to the shelter, and there was a commissioner that had a very interesting conversation because he doesn't speak Spanish and this little girl didn't speak English, but they were able to somehow communicate to each other. And by the time he was finished, communicating with this young woman or this child, he, like I said, I think he had tears in his eyes, and it brought it home that we really need to do something in this country to make things better for these people.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Stott, for all of the important work that you do in your community, and again for joining us today on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And we're back. So joining us for this next segment is the president of the Migration Policy Institute, Andrew Seeley. Andrew is an internationally known researcher and expert on migration, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean. He previously was, for 17 years, the director of the Mexico Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And we are happy to have him here to talk about the North American Leaders Summit, the Biden administration's recently announced border initiatives, and migration in the hemisphere. So welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Teresa. Good to be with you.
So our last episode actually had Chris Sands, who's the director of the Canada Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center, to talk about the U.S.-Canada side of the North American Leaders Summit. So I kind of can't wait to hear your take on the U.S.-Mexico side, particularly about migration. So as we know, President Biden joined the Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada and the Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador in Mexico City in early January. This is the second time they have met in 5 years. What do you think were the key takeaways from this summit on migration?
On migration, I think all the news happened before the summit. And that tends to be true, right? I mean, when heads of state get together for summits, most of the groundwork has been done by their teams ahead of time, right? And the summit is really about smoothing some of the edges, maybe figuring out where some red lines are and getting a measure of each other. So usually, however, the announcements happen at the summit. In this case, the announcements happened before the summit, which was, President Biden coming out and making his first speech on the border, followed by Secretary Mayorkas, and they announced a program for 4 nationalities to take in 30,000 people through a sponsorship program every month. But also the returns of those people of other people from those nationalities to Mexico if they didn't come through the sponsorship program. And that was obviously negotiated with Mexico. The part of the returns was negotiated with Mexico. But there's also some reason to believe that Mexico was quite insistent on the pathways, and the numbers match. Mexico said it would take back 30,000 people from those countries, those 4 countries, which are Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, and Haiti, as long as the U.S. opened up 30,000 slots for people to come on sponsorship programs. So, it was a summit announced ahead of time, like the big announcement happened, and then at the summit they apparently talked about the Los Angeles Declaration, the rest of the hemisphere. There was some other discussions about migration, but the real bilateral stuff happened ahead of time.
Yeah. So, talking about sort of the Los Angeles Declaration and hemispheric cooperation, do you think there are any sort of noteworthy plans in the works that would extend this cooperation, particularly between the United States, Canada, and Mexico on migration?
I think the three countries are talking about it a lot, but they have different needs and they're in different vantage points, right? So Canada is more of a bystander on the issue of migration in the hemisphere. Canada, of course, has a great deal of migration. It's a country that is, probably of the three, the one that has immigration most, as you know well, because you know Canada extremely well, that has, immigration most embedded in its national policies, especially within its employment and economic policies. But it's primarily immigration from outside the hemisphere. I mean, there are some people coming from certainly the United States and Latin America and the Caribbean, but the vast number coming from Asia and other places. And so, and they don't have a border that routinely has lots of people arriving unexpectedly. So, I mean, a few people here and there, coming up Roxton Road, but that's about it. So Canada is active on the protection side. It's active on the development side. Canada has been helpful at trying to extend a little bit its temporary worker programs in Central America. So Canada is there and certainly talks with the other two countries about that, how to be helpful. They're very active in helping countries think about their asylum systems. So there is a conversation among the three countries about how you do this. But the real action is always between the United States and Mexico, right, which are dealing with the largest flows coming through, Mexico on their way to the U.S., people sometimes staying in Mexico. That's the active conversation going on. I think the three are together on the architecture, on the sort of notional idea of how we manage migration in the hemisphere. But the real content is mostly Mexico and U.S. with Canada as a supporting partner.
So you've talked a little bit about the announcements that President Biden made. It seems that there's a lot of effort at trying to address this current group of migrants that are from, as you mentioned, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti. But there were a couple other things that were sort of more to longer term. There was a proposal for a new asylum rule that might restrict eligibility for those who traveled to the border through other countries and didn't apply there, which kind of leads me to ask, what ability is there for many migrants to apply for safety in some of these other countries? I mean, we've talked about the Los Angeles Declaration, the idea of getting more countries in the hemisphere to sort of help with the management of the migration. It seems like, okay, we're gonna require this now, but how confident are we that other countries in the region have the ability to sort of take up these additional asylum applicants?
It's not very clear. I mean, I think Mexico has received over 120,000 applications this year, completely overtaxed, has a very hard time making asylum decisions. They make it faster than the U.S. does, of course, but people are often left in very vulnerable situations and unable to work. The U.S. is a much easier country to survive in during a temporary period. If you have a work permit, Mexico is quite hard. Costa Rica has a very good asylum system, but again, completely overrun. They're trying to see if they can take out part of the backlog by giving people other status besides asylum that would temporary status that could be renewable, and so maybe be able to get control of the backlog, but completely overrun at this point. Colombia does not have much of an asylum system. They do have an asylum system, but they've just had 2.5 million Venezuelans come in and largely opted to use temporary protection. Now, 10-year temporary protection, quite quality temporary, and the ability for people to adjust to resident visas over time. It's a little costly, but it can be done. And they use the regular visa system. There's actually more people that simply got resident visas either through employment or through marriage. Many Venezuelans were married to Colombians. There were 1 million Colombians living in Venezuela, so a lot of the Venezuelans who came to Colombia early on particularly were in mixed marriages where one was already a Colombian national. So there's more people who got other kinds of visas than asylum in Colombia. It's a system that just has never been tested And they opted not to plus it up. They opted for these other measures. So I think it's hard to see how other countries pick this up. But I think, I think what they're trying to do is a presumption. What I understand, and again, they have not been fully clear on this yet from the administration, is that they are, not that you would have no ability to apply, but there will be a presumption, there will be a much higher standard if people pass through other countries where they could have sought asylum and did not. And that's an interesting proposition. I would expect other countries in the world to follow if the U.S. does this. I think whatever the U.S. does on asylum, we should assume that this is going to be a monumental shift globally, because this is a liberal administration, liberal in the global sense, not liberal in the American sense, liberal conservative, although that is true as well. But liberal, this is seen as being sort of Biden is seen as being part of the normal international order. The U.S., maybe with Trump, it wasn't seen that way, right? Trump may have been an anomaly for some of the Europeans, but I suspect if Biden makes a move on asylum, you'll see some of the European countries and maybe others around the world follow suit.
Yeah, I mean, it's already getting a lot of pushback from asylum and international refugee advocates. One thing I kind of have been trying to explain, the idea of safe third country. We only have a safe third country agreement with Canada, which is basically an exception to the refugee protocols that's between countries. In other words, it's not considered non-refoulement if we have an agreement with another country to send people back there and they can apply there. This is kind of a unilateral thing, though, right? I mean, safe third country agreements are between countries, and it's not an obligation on the migrant, but it's basically a decision as how countries divide asylum applicants between them. This would be an affirmative requirement of a migrant, which I think is probably relatively new thing. Trump tried to do it and was sued. So I personally fully expect that the Biden administration would be sued over this as well, unless it's really fundamentally different. But how do you think that will impact we already talked about the other countries in the hemisphere? How will they respond to such a thing?
I think they will roll with it in a sense that I don't think they have much ability to push back on the U.S. doing this. I think you may see them do similar things. I think there is, Latin America, it is often missed in the U.S., but, countries in Latin America have doubled the number of foreign-born in the past 10 years, right? I mean, there really is, between 2010 and 2021, so about 11 years, there was a doubling of the number of foreign-born people, number of migrants living in other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, largely driven by a few displacement crises. So Venezuelans were about 3/4 of that, Nicaraguans moving to Costa Rica, Haitians moving to Brazil and Chile after the earthquake. I mean, this was Cubans moving everywhere. I mean, there were a series of movements driven by crises in different countries that led people to go elsewhere. But right now, Latin American, Caribbean countries are starting to become also a little more restrictive, right? And so I suspect you'll see some countries, following the U.S. in this as well. That the reality is, I mean, though this would be completely new, the Refugee Convention is silent on where you have to get asylum, right? I mean, it doesn't say where. At the same time, I think, if you ask most people, say, can you choose where you go for asylum? People, well, that's kind of, maybe, I don't know, that seems a little odd too, right? We've never really come down to a conversation like, where do you have to go for asylum? Should there be some sort of norm on this? That said, we've seen lots of measures to try and shape this. So Title 42, right? I mean, we're simply not allowing asylum, temporary measure. We're not allowing the deal EU has with Turkey, right? I mean, essentially is a way of not giving people access to asylum in the EU, right? I mean, there are lots of these things that have happened de facto. This would be the first time of really trying to shape it in law, and I suspect it will create a whole conversation about where do you apply for asylum, and can you asylum shop? Is it right to asylum shop because that's how you really get protection, and you can't be assured protection other places, or is that just another way of trying to get in to a country? And as we know, it's become the way people try and go, even if they don't have protection needs, because there aren't other legal pathways, right? And so until there are other legal pathways, asylum is kind of the default that many people have.
Yeah. So let me ask you about sort of just, the unprecedented levels of migration as you talked about in the hemisphere. it doesn't seem to be going away soon. Do you think there is emerging any sort of comprehensive idea or policy about how to manage this? I mean, we talked about the Los Angeles Declaration last year, which seemed to be kind of getting at this idea that countries in the hemisphere should share the burden of migration. We're having that conversation internally in the United States too, with certain cities that are seeing a lot of migrants asking other places to share the burden. Do you think that there's sort of is this going to lead to another sort of maybe international set of standards or norms that just need to happen so that it can be managed?
I think we're seeing something interesting happen, and what that interesting thing, we'll see what it turns into. So the interesting thing is that there's a conversation about how you create a triangle between enforcement, legal pathways, and protection, right? And as well as attention to root causes, but that is really much more long-term in most cases. And then how do you cooperate with other countries on this? Because you actually need to cooperate with other countries on all three of those components. That conversation is really active. I think you see it in the response to, what they were trying to do with the Venezuelans, Cubans, and Nicaraguans, and Haitians were thrown in there. But I mean, particularly those three groups that were becoming a very large number and they couldn't be returned to their country of origin, what they were trying to, they really wanted an enforcement measure to stop this. But I think as a result of the Los Angeles, declaration and the conversations around that, the notion that you also have to create a legal pathway is really embedded. Right, and so they did both. They created a legal pathway and they did an enforcement measure. They used blunt tools, parole in one case, right, and Title 42 in the other. So neither one are great tools, but they were the tools they had in the toolbox. I think you're seeing this in other countries too. You're seeing this with Chile trying to figure out how to get control of some of the migration on its border, but also trying to create some more active legal pathways, particularly for its neighbors in Peru and Bolivia. Costa Rica is doing the same thing with both Panama and Nicaragua, but with Nicaragua in particular. With Panama, it's more because of there's been sort of an ongoing people come back and forth during harvest season. But in Nicaragua, there really is a constant flow. And they've realized that, if you can create a circular flow, you might actually be able to stop some people from coming permanently, because they might actually rather come and go, make money and go back. It started a conversation I think is happening in all sorts of interesting ways, whether it changes and it's sort of gotten us away from, basically, people sort of move a little bit, a little bit laissez-faire, or we stop them. This is becoming a little more, how do we structure these things? How do we have conversations that allow us to structure migration? If this really manages to get control of the numbers that are moving and create some order and some predictability and some fairness for people that need to move, I think that remains to be seen. But there's a conversation going on, and there's a few things we can point to.
So one last question, because you spent a lot of your career looking at the U.S.-Mexico relationship, and now you're looking at migration. In the United States, immigration is almost universally been seen as a domestic political issue. And here we are in a situation where the United States government pretty much has to rely on other countries to manage this migration flow. That's a pretty new situation for the United States. And you still have a lot of people sort of thinking we should just be able to just shut it down, right? But Biden had to negotiate with Mexico. Trump had to negotiate with Mexico. He wanted to build a wall. He still had to get Mexico to agree to take people back. Mexico never did pay for the wall, right? So do you think that maybe we are going to get to a point where that sort of understanding of the domestic immigration politics versus this international migration reality are going to either collide or sort of merge to create a new path forward?
Yes, I mean, I think that's happening already, and and along the way, both the Los Angeles Declaration and the all the work on the Global Compact on migration, which the U.S. has now adhered to, whatever that means, or at least expressed its support for. It is about that. Like, how do we do this? But it's happened. I would say the U.S. and Mexico started having serious conversations under the Bush administration. There'd always been conversation with Mexico on migration, but started to figure out how do we structure this. It didn't quite go anywhere because of 9/11. change things. The Obama administration very much so during the rise in unaccompanied minors in 2014. The southern border strategy in Mexico was a product of, realizing that now these were migrants from Central America and that Mexico had to be part of the solution. You saw it under Trump. Trump was the ultimate in, nationalistic politics, but ultimately he reached a deal with Mexico also on their enforcement side. Now you're seeing with Biden. I think this is a reality everywhere, and I think you're going to see countries willing to do this, but also asking, as I think happens in the negotiation with Mexico, saying, yeah, but you also got to create legal pathways. Don't always count on enforcement. And I do think we have to be realistic about what other countries can do. I think there's a problem in trying to outsource enforcement. It feels better for the soul sometimes for U.S. policymakers because they don't see what's happening. But to assume that the Mexican Immigration Service has the capacity to stop people and not be corrupted by organized crime and by smuggling organizations, is a little bit dangerous thinking.
Yeah, there's also what will Mexico continue to ask of the United States in exchange for our assistance? I mean, ask Europe what Turkey has asked for, right? I think there's a question there.
Right, there's a slippery slope. Ask Libyans, right? I mean, who do you ask in Libya, right? I mean, ask the Moroccans, right? I mean, this becomes a slippery slope because it is not a domestic political issue in the same way for them. They don't have the same vested interest in trying to limit the number of people crossing that the U.S. does because it is a domestic political issue here. And, it leads to some really complicated conversations. And so I do think it's a slippery slope. And I do think it's, again, it feels good to American policymakers that they're not deporting people, that someone else is doing the job for them. Whether that is the best way to do things, I think we should be a little bit self-critical.
Well, Andrew Seeley, thank you so much for joining us on This Week in Immigration to unpack all of that. Greatly appreciate your time.
Teresa, it's always great to be able to speak with you.
Fantastic.
And that's it for our show this week. One last reminder to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform, and share it with your friends and colleagues. You can also find more information on all of the issues we discuss here on the show at bipartisanpolicy.org/immigration. You can follow the Bipartisan Policy Center on Twitter at BPC_bipartisan. You can follow Teresa Cardinal Brown at BPC_T Brown. I'm Hannadi Jordan. This Week in Immigration was created and executive produced by Teresa Cardinal Brown. This week's episode was written by Hannadi Jordan, Natalie Butler, and Teresa Cardinal Brown. The executive producer of BPC Podcasts is Lucy Manning. See you next time on This Week in Immigration.